Over the past few months, I've been revisiting Greek and Roman mythology, not only through a trip to Greece this past fall with my older daughter, but also through her apparently enduring fascination with the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan, in which contemporary kids are the actual children of Greek and Roman deities who, just as in ancient times, are still having plenty of illicit relationships with mortals and producing demigod offspring worthy of Hercules. In one such encounter between a demigod and a deity, Annabeth Chase, who is a daughter of Athena, meets Janus and his famous two faces, one looking to the left and one looking to the right. He's trying to confuse her about what choice to make, and each face is telling her something different. "I'm your best friend," the right face says. "I'm your worst enemy," says the left. And then in unison, for once, they say together, "I'm Janus, god of doorways, beginnings, endings, choices." Given his association with beginnings, endings, doorways, and choices, Janus has classically been associated with the new year, an association that continues from antiquity to the present day and gives us our word for January, the first month of this very much upcoming new year. Traditionally, he's depicted with two heads, one facing forward to look into the future, and one facing backwards, looking into the past. The tradition of making New Year's resolutions has its roots in ancient Rome, too, as Romans would make promises to Janus after the first of the year. And on the 9th day of January, a ram would be offered by a priesthood associated with the Roman Senate in sacrifice to Janus. As we come to this New Year's turning, though, I find myself thinking about a different classical myth, the story of Orpheus in the underworld, a tale that has inspired numerous renderings in art and music, including that very difficult poem so skillfully read for us by Gail. Thank you for taking that on. In the classical myth, Orpheus is the son of Apollo and the muse Calliope. He's a bard, a musician, a poet, and a prophet, one whose music is so beautiful that he can charm stones, animals, and even enemies into doing his bidding. He falls in love with Eurydice, whom he marries, but their love is not to last. The tellings differ slightly. Some say that she is killed on her wedding day by being bitten by a snake. Perhaps maybe their marriage lasts very briefly before the fateful snake bite. But either way, he does not get to spend very much time with his beloved. He sings of his grief with his lyre, and the music is so beautiful that even the gods hear of his grief. He decides to descend into the underworld to look for Eurydice. On the way, he passes by Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the entrance to the underworld, and he charms him with the power of his music. He plays a song for Hades, the god of the underworld, and his wife Persephone, telling of his grief. And Hades, miraculously perhaps, tells Orpheus that he can return to the world of the living with his wife, but on one condition. She must walk behind him, and he cannot look back to see her as they walk, or he will not get her back as he hopes. Can you imagine it? Your grief is so deep that not only do you feel trapped in a world of dark and nameless, almost faceless shades and ghosts, but you even in truth descend into this world. Orpheus came literally to the depths of despair to ask for the return of that which was the most precious to him, of what he simply could not quite let go of. Have you ever been there, so lost that you would descend to darkness for the return of what you loved? Initially, Orpheus is delighted. His wife is all but returned to him, only a simple task of walking back through the underworld, past the ghostly shades, to the world of light and life above. But as he walks, He doesn't hear her footsteps. Have the gods tricked him? Is she still a shade? When Orpheus is only a few feet away from the exit, his faith, if we can call it that, starts to waver, and he turns to look to see if she's indeed following. That is the moment that he truly loses her. By the terms of their agreement, she must return to the underworld and remain there forever. Orpheus, as a living mortal, cannot re-enter the world of the dead again. He has truly, truly lost her. Can you imagine this renewed grief? His regret to have that which he most desires within reach and to lose her again. I'm sure you have your own stories of loss or grief or regret. My own story of such loss is, ironically, about music, about desiring something perhaps too much. About 8 years ago, I attempted to return to playing the French horn after nearly 15 years, mostly away from the instrument. I picked it up here and there. My daughter, at age 2, tried to blow through it and did a remarkably good job. But my own playing never felt quite the same. My lips tired too quickly, or my tone was off, or I just wasn't in the right mood to keep going with it. This time, 8 years ago, felt different. I was recovering from an injury. My kids were a little older. The horn was just there. It took a few weeks, including a week off or two after some dental work, but all of a sudden I could play again. I could play old solos and favorite exercises. The tingle in my lips felt right, like a horn player's lips. It felt like falling in love again. It felt like rediscovering a love I'd had in my youth that I'd lost and that had been miraculously restored to me. It felt like bathing in the fountain of youth. It felt like a miracle. In an attempt to stave off some other difficulties I was facing at the time, I signed up to play in a musical, something I used to love doing. Did I know that I was doing too much? Too soon, perhaps? Did I listen to the little internal voice that suggested that this might not be a good idea? Not yet. I didn't. Not before I sat in a long rehearsal and used small facial muscles to produce notes I hadn't wailed out in years, to use techniques I remember deep in my body, but for which those same muscles were frankly and utterly unprepared. As a high G, which is this lovely note, rang out in a rehearsal at the end of the first act of the musical, a long triumphant note, bliss flared through my body, and nerve endings cried out that it had been too long. I'd returned. I was back. Like Orpheus turning back for just one look at his wife whom he'd lost. I had forgotten how much I loved this, how much I missed it and needed it, and it was all there for me again. When I got home that evening, I felt a pulling and a tugging in a small corner of my lip muscle area, up by the right side of just under my nose. I knew then that, like Orpheus, I hadn't heeded the warnings. I had looked back, just one glance, one high note, loud and clear and pure like Orpheus's lyre itself, but that was the note that changed it all. I had to leave the musical, of course. I flailed. I researched online extensively. I talked to experts and to other brass players who had experienced similar injuries. I took time off from the horn. I stopped playing for weeks or months or years. I did facial exercises. I tried acupuncture. I learned massage tricks. I got my daughter into playing the horn because even as that toddler trying to play an instrument that was at the time bigger than she was, she had a good buzz. She'd be able to do this if she wanted to, and she is doing it. It's a difficult instrument, as she knows, even without an injury. You need to shove a small circle at your lips and buzz at just the right frequency to make 12 feet of metal tubing produce just the right pitch. And because of the laws of physics and vibration, there are several different pitches that can result unless you get just the right vibration in your lips. It's not easy. Most of the time, over these long years since that strange apparent injury, I find myself understanding why people say they'd meet a devil at the crossroads in order to be in service to their music, or realizing why I descend to the underworld as many times as I could if I had the promise of the return of what I'd lost. The dark nights of the soul I've had for these 12 feet of tubing feel like grief, like loss, like a love never recovered, like a limb I'm still sometimes missing. Maybe it's not the same as the loss of a person, but it feels real to me, and it is its own grief and loss. Reverend Lucas gave a sermon only a few weeks ago about regret and the possibility of turning that regret into something more, something better, something more hopeful and more whole. And that's been getting me thinking. As we pause on this morning in a time of turnings between the face that looks to the past and the face that looks to the future, I wonder what are the regrets you keep with you? What is it that you are always tempted to keep looking back at? Upon leaving the underworld, fully separated from Eurydice, Orpheus plays a song of mourning on his lyre. He wishes only for death, that he can be reunited finally with his beloved. And moved by the music, the beasts respond and they tear him apart, giving him that which he desires, death. In some other versions, the Maenads, the followers of Dionysus, are in a frenzy and they do the same, ripping him apart and he dies. Thankfully, I'm not quite that desperate. In a well-known story in the Hebrew Bible, the story of Lot brings a similar parallel. Lot, his wife, and their daughters are warned by an angel to flee the city of Sodom before its destruction by God. They too are commanded not to look back. As they flee, though, Lot's wife also turns to look around, and she too is punished, turned into a pillar of salt. What is it about these stories that make turning around to look behind us so dangerous? We're warned by our parents as small children, look in front of us, look where you're going, right? Otherwise, we might trip and fall and hurt ourselves. But there are other deeper, more emotional reasons, I think, also not to look only behind and to also look to the future. I, for myself, want to be done wallowing with my own might-have-beens. For this New Year's turning, I'm finding my way to something free of the sadness and sense of loss that sits there with me with this instrument. Perhaps recovering my playing, which I've slowly been doing, will not be the joyful rediscovery it once was, but a harder road that still yields results that I hope I can one day share here. Instead of looking back, I may still find my way to a new place at the end of this instrument's long 12 dark feet of tubing that twists this way and that, an intentional labyrinth that leads always to the stunning flared breadth of a brass bell shining in the light. What if Janus, the god of turnings and the god of the new year, were on that path out of the underworld instead of Orpheus? What if he closed the eyes that looked behind him to the way he had just walked, so that he no longer saw the darkness? What if he could only see through the eyes that looked ahead, the eyes turned towards the light and the wondrous world of new life? What would the new year hold for you?